Shalom, shalom. This is Elder Ephraim, all the way in the Gulf, here to drop another biblical nugget and or token for your spiritual edification. Today's message, I'm going to be touching on truth. And so the message is actually inspired by the late Charlie Kirk, who throughout his assassination, all the media coverage and social media attention that his assassination is bringing to light, one of the things that really stood out to me was his personal truth. Now, it's going to be like a twofold message on truth from two different angles. And so I'm going to start with an initial angle that we're going to put Charlie Kirk's truth to the side for a moment, and we're going to bring it back up as we bring attention to his truth and therefore your truth from a spiritual perspective. But I want to talk about a story that I sat under the voice of a specific speaker many years ago, many years ago actually. And the individual was a minority. And I say minority because it takes precedence in the story itself. So this individual, being a minority, was being applauded and given a lot of accolades for the achievements throughout his life. And one of the things that stood out about this individual is what he achieved at such a young age. His late 20s, early 30s, 30, 31, like early 30s. He managed to obtain a PhD. He was Dr. such and such. And as a doctor, not a medical doctor, but within the profession of his studies, he became a doctor. And as a minority, he understood that in the region he was in, that he grew up in, and that he was surrounded by, he was considered a minority. As a minority, it was true that within that region, that city, that town, that state, that country that he was a part of, he was considered a minority. And he understood that that was true. His accomplishments of achieving what he achieved at such a young age by obtaining a PhD was motivated beyond what his region perceived of him. So his region perceived him to be a minority within that region. But he made a decision to put on the lens from a global perspective. And because of that perspective that he saw life through, it allowed him to go beyond what was true in his environment. So while in his environment it was true that he was a minority, he realized that from a global perspective, from a global point of view, from the lens of a global perspective, he wasn't a minority, he was actually a majority. So while it was true he was a minority here, from the perspective of a global perspective, he was a majority. So while true here, the truth of the matter overrode what was true here. The truth was he was majority, while it was true he was a minority here. And so the reason I think about this story is twofold. Is first, how do we perceive ourselves? How do other people perceive us? And it correlates with the late Charlie Kirk in that as I analyzed and viewed all the attention and media coverage he's getting because of the assassination, it allowed me to focus in on his individual truth. And why I say that is because I noticed that throughout a lot of the coverage, the majority of his coverage, there was a lot of emphasis on his faith. And so when you understand scripture from the perspective of 1 Samuel chapter 12, verse 24, it emphasizes your commitment to the Most High by way of service with all of your heart. So regardless of his party affiliation, we knew he was a Republican, but rather whether Republican or Democrat, we knew he was a Christian, whether Baptist, non-denomination, it doesn't matter. We just know that his recognition and those that esteem him is based on the fact that he implemented or he exercised his truth by serving with all his heart. Again, regardless of the religious background or the religious sect of Christianity, he stands out to the masses within his circle as a person that was so committed to his cause, exemplifying his individual truth. So this message is inspired because of, again, his truth. So I challenge you as a believer. What is your truth? When you look at things around you that may be regionally true from a regional perspective, from a global perspective, what is your view? Now, as believers, I want to emphasize on two specific verses that are mentioned in Psalms chapter 119, verses 142 and 151. 142 and verses 151. And what verse 142 emphasizes is that law is truth, while Psalms 151 emphasizes that all of his commandments is truth. You know, there are religions that emphasizes grace over law as if the law is no longer valid. And so I'll stress this as I've said it before. If the law is done away with, then what you're admitting and committing to is that sins, which is transgression of the law, according to 1 John 3:4, is that when it comes to adultery, when it comes to killing, when it comes to lying, when it comes to stealing, when it comes to coveting, you're saying that that's valid. In other words, that's permissible if law is not a factor, right? And so, because law and all of his commandments is truth, I want you to look at life from the lens of truth versus the things that are true or may be true because of certain circumstances. Remember the gentleman I introduced earlier in this message, while he understood he was a minority in this region, it was a true statistic. The truth of his understanding, based on from a global perspective, he was actually majority and not a minority. And so as a believer, when you understand that the truth of who we are is capsulized in the law and the commandments. And when you commit to serving the Most High with all your heart in truth, it brings you to comprehend that your relationship with the Most High needs to be focus on the law and the commandments as our patriarchs. And what I mean by that is when you look at the life of Paul in the book of Acts, chapter 28, verse 23, he taught about Hamashiach Yahushua, or Jesus Christ, by way of the law and the prophets. During his dispensation, it is believed that the manuscripts or the parchment documents or the writings of the time is what we consider nowadays the Septuagint. The Septuagint writings were written in Greek because of the dispensation they were in. They were Hellenized. They were Greek in character and in nature. They were in a dispensation where it was Latin because of the Roman captivity. It was Greek because of the Greek languages or what have you. And then it had to do with the Hebrew because of some Hebrew culture. So during the dispensation of Paul and them, because of the Hellenized period that we were in as believers, there was a lot of material written in Greek. And so it is said, based on historical documents and or history in itself, the material that Paul taught was based on the Septuagint, which was only written in the Old Testament perspective, which was the first 5 books of the Bible with the rest of the prophets and the rest of the writings and our prophets that make up what we know today as the Old Testament. 300 plus years after Hamashiach Yahushua, Jesus or Christ's death, was when the Codex Sinaiticus, which is the formation of the Old and New Testament, in production. So during the dispensation of the disciples, of the gospel writings, of all the letters that were written by Paul and some of the gospel authors, was based off of the Septuagint writings and or the Hebraic writings that were translated in Greek during that dispensation. And so if Paul, taught by way of the law and the prophets, he was teaching based on what was the documents of the time, which we know to be the Old Testament and the Old Testament only. So I stress that to emphasize that the truth from a biblical perspective emphasizes the law and the commandments as the truth of a real believer, of an authentic, wholehearted believer. Now we know, Charlie Kirk was a believer in his own right. Whether we agree on his doctrine, at the end of the day, there are many religions worldwide, from Buddhists, from Islam, from Christianity, and all of the different sects. But as an individual that teaches and strive to live a life from a biblical perspective, it's easy to view and or expound on certain aspects that Charlie Kirk was known for, because how much attention he's getting because of his faith. He was actually, in one of his interviews, he was asked, when it was all said and done, what would you like to be remembered by? And he didn't say what he did for this person, what he did for that person, his wife, his children. He didn't mention nothing. He actually said, at the end of the day, when it was all said and done, I would like to be remembered by my faith. And so as a believer myself, it stood out to me how his life was based on his personal truth. When I take his life into consideration and the attention that he's getting, whether again you agree on his faith or where he stood, it's a good opportunity to just look in the mirror and ask yourself, what is truth to you? How real is truth to you? How true is truth to you. Because when it's all said and done, and it's your time to be dismissed from the loved ones, from the children, from the spouse, from the family members, the parents, when it's time for you to exit, how will you be remembered? What will be your truth? What will be truth to those that you leave behind? And so I want to leave you all with that perspective of the things that may be true may be limited to your personal truth. And I would encourage you all to embrace the truth in your convictions, where it draws you closer to the law and the commandments stipulated in the book of Psalms by one of our greatest patriarchs of our culture, of David, King David. So I want to leave you with this nugget and or token for you to ponder on, and I look forward to hearing testimonially from you and you. God bless.